Hi, welcome to my presentation on toxic Christian systems, perspectives, power, and promises. My name is Patty Tessandori, and I'm doing this presentation in alignment with my organizational communications class coursework for my master's in organizational leadership at Point Loma Nazarene University. Now, in the context of organizational leadership studies, there are many stories of the good, the bad, and the ugly when analyzing organizational systems for dysfunction. However, there's one subject that's rarely mentioned within the context, especially of the Christian evangelical complex, and that is the idea that there might be toxic Christian systems. And that's not because these toxic Christian systems don't exist. It's because rarely do people have the fortitude and the will to say something about it and to do something about it when they find themselves in this kind of a system. And there are, thankfully, a lot of different resources out there about toxic systems in general, but not as much about Christian systems. There's some people are starting to come out of the woodwork, and they're starting to talk about these things. But this is something that's, I think, a really important thing to talk about. It's a really important thing for people within Christian context to understand. It's an important thing for leaders to understand, for people that are within context, and also for those that have the ability to make changes into systems. I'm hoping that this will help people to understand and be aware of how things can go wrong, and also how to maybe turn the tide back so that things can go right. Now, this is a research project, so I used this idea, toxic Christian systems, perspectives, power, and promises, because I interviewed 3 different families that have perspective from 3 different eras in a particular organization. And we talk about the power structures, the way power was exhibited, the way people felt empowered or not empowered, and also about the promises that had drawn them, and the promises that were ultimately broken, and that left them having to struggle and move forward in a particular way. Now, when we're involved in a Christian system, sometimes, we want to believe that our leaders are doing the right thing. We want to believe that things are going well. We want to be on board. We want to be able to trust. But sometimes things aren't always the way they seem, and something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Now, this isn't a new idea. This isn't a new problem. This line is Shakespeare, coming from Horatio spoke it in Hamlet, Scene 1, Act 1, Scene 4, line 100, and it's talking about corruption. And in his context, he's talking about corruption within their political system. But this can also be in so many ways. So this was 420 years ago in 1599 when Shakespeare published his first version of Hamlet. And here we are. Something is still rotten in the state of Denmark. And so this presentation today is allowing a few people who had lost their voice to be able to kind of regain their voice and begin the process of healing from the toxic Christian systems that they found themselves in. Now, introducing the organization. This organization, the U.S. Center for World Mission, Frontier Ventures was the name that they chose to rebrand in 2015, and Carey International University. They're very closely intertwined entities, and so I'm considering them as one organization, even though legally they've done some funny footwork to try to split themselves off. But originally, the U.S. Center for World Mission and William Carey International University were somewhat intertwined, although anyway, I'm counting them as one entity for the sake of discussion in this matter. And you see the picture on the bottom is the founder, Dr. Ralph Winter, and behind him is the library building where I used to work when I was the PhD program administrator for 5 years in the organization. So yes, I was a member of this organization. I was a part of this community, and so I have firsthand seen a lot of the things that I've decided to research and talk about in this presentation. So, and the reason the face of horror, the scream, that he's kind of my theme throughout the thing. Edward Munch's anxiety and the scream are throughout, because there's it's kind of horrifying, really, because Dr. Winter was named one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America in 2005, just a few years before he passed away. His organization, the U.S. Center for World Mission, has a stellar reputation. They've written hundreds of books. They've got 3 or 4 major publications, depending on how you slice it. They've made such an impact on the cause for world mission, on awareness, public awareness. I mean, really, there's been so much that has been well regarded within the Christian community of this particular context. So the idea that this could be a toxic Christian system is absolutely horrifying. And honestly, I don't know if I would have believed it if I hadn't actually experienced it myself. Now, the three families that I interviewed all come from different perspectives. Now, and I'm kind of playing on words because Perspectives is actually one of the programs of the U.S. Center for World Mission. It's a missions program that is run all over the country and has mobilized more people for world missions work than really probably any other program in existence. But these three families had different perspectives. One was a founding era family, a founder era family. And they were there at the very beginning, and they were there when they were actually literally crafting the entities. They were there when the community was being built. They mobilized some of the first people, wrote some of the first magazine articles, did a lot of really key interesting stuff, and were incredibly close to the founders. And then the second family that was interviewed was like a full peak collaboration family, someone that had come in just as the campus was paid off. The campus was literally bursting at the seams. There was all this different activity going on, and they were working with a collaborating organization. They were part of the community. They had a key Buddhist study center that they were doing. And then the third family is a floundering era family, I call it, who was there at the very end when the organization decided to rebrand itself, and then the leaders secretly started planning to sell the campus. And literally outside my window, they have crushed one of the buildings that we used to meet in that was very important to our community where my daughter went to school. Just the last couple days, they're literally bulldozing away the rubble from knocking it down yesterday and the day before. So this is still a process that's going on. This is a campus that was now sold to a non-Christian purpose and now is going to not be used for Christian service anymore, in a complete betrayal of the donor covenants. So anyway, those are the three families that were interviewed. I had a total of 50 interview questions. These were long interviews. These were very in-depth. All of the interviews lasted over 5 hours long, and it was a chance for people to really voice what they'd been feeling, to process. All of these people willingly participated. They were looking for an opportunity to kind of process some of their feelings and process what had happened and to kind of tell their story. And I was so thankful to be able to come alongside them. And I'm praying that this will help them to receive greater healing, and also to know and for us all to have better wisdom and insight into how to move forward from this point. So once again, like I said, this is about perspectives, power, and promises. The perspectives of three different people who had three different levels of closeness to the organizational leaders, who experienced the power structures in certain ways, and also had been motivated by promises to come and found those promises broken. Now, I'm couching a lot of my research using a really fabulous framework that was by Padilla, Hogan and Kaiser, developed in 2007, called the Toxic Triangle. And as you can see there, the top of the Toxic Triangle, the top point is destructive leaders, because so many people focus on that it's all about the leaders, that if the leaders are poisonous, or if the leaders are mean or dysfunctional somehow, that it's going to destroy everything. And I do believe that there is a speed of the captain, speed of the crew that does happen. However, I really like this format because it talks about how this is a cooperative process. This is not just a one-way street. There's also susceptible followers that want to believe the leader, that desire to support the mission, that for whatever reason agree to be part of the system, that are drawn in and somehow captured and entranced and maybe even addicted to the system. And then the third point of the triangle is a conducive environments. These are conducive environments. These are things like accountability structures or the lack thereof. It has to do with the values, the ways things are done that go beyond just at the member level, that actually work in the environment to create an environment that allows this toxic dance to go forward, where people are interacting and creating a poisonous system. Now, destructive leaders and even a toxic system, destructive leaders, according to Jean Lippman Bauman, is a destructive or toxic leader is someone who leaves a person or a system worse off than they found it. And this is, I think, also works for just even the wholeness of the toxic system. Destructive leaders can exhibit a lot of different traits, shall we say. There's a very much a power and control thing that happens in a Christian system. There's the idea that they are the Lord's anointed, and that what they're doing is from God, and people who come against it or who don't agree are actually are moving away from alignment with the will of God Himself. There is a lack of integrity in destructive leaders, that it will spin or manipulate or recast things so that they don't, so that what they want to have happen happens, so that they can manipulate. And that actually has a lot of dishonesty in it. There's an incredible arrogance and ego in destructive leaders that feel absolutely empowered, that feel they're more valuable than other people, that they have every right to walk all over people. But that is also mirrored by an internal cowardice that doesn't really want to confront when people that feels uncomfortable being confronted, and also doesn't want to confront harsh realities that they don't want to face. They avoid. There's passive resistance, but there's like an avoidance of actually making the hard decisions, sometimes of being open about what they're doing. There is a fear monger quality where they actually install and enhance fear in other people to keep them in place. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works in this particular system. There's also blame casting. When something goes wrong, they find someone else to blame. It's not them, it's someone else in the system. Ultimately, there's a lot of poor stewardship, and this is not just stewardship of assets like a beautiful campus, but also the people who had come and volunteered their services, who were coming from all these places, all these people with talents and dreams and heart that came and poured in, which is what made the U.S. Center for World Mission what it was. And ultimately, destructive leaders are abusive. They will walk on people, they will hurt people, they will use people like they're expendable, disposable cogs in a system. And in my study, I found all of these factors were happening in the leader, in the founder of the organization, and also in the subsequent leaders. Now, susceptible followers. Susceptible followers can, there's quite a gamut. There's quite a crowd of them. There's two main ones that Padilla talks about. They're the conformers that just kind of go along and keep their head down and try not to upset the apple cart. And then there's the colluders that actually come alongside the destructive leaders on their own quest for power. Toxic handlers are kind of an interesting side group. They're particular people who kind of act in a buffer role. They're not necessarily the toxic people themselves, but they work in the system to kind of buffer other people from the toxic leaders or the toxic environments. And they either reframe messages, they're the encouragers, they're the ones that kind of keep everything going together when things are going really wrong, and when someone needs to be kind of an intermediary between a toxic leader and the rest of the organization. There's an addictive organizational roles that can happen. Schaaf and Fassel in their addictive organizations talk about how people can become even addicts of their system, and then they begin to exhibit actual qualities that you would see like in a dysfunctional addictive family system, like where some are hero children that really work hard and are the ones who do everything the right way, the lost children that kind of just drop out and kind of do their own thing and go off in their own world. There's scapegoats that get blamed for everything, the troublemakers that keep pressing everyone's buttons but kind of keep the system going, and even the mascots that kind of act clown-like and try to lighten the atmosphere to keep it from being so painful. Finally, in the susceptible followers, there's the last category are the outcasts and the whistleblowers. Now, the whistleblowers are the ones that actually stand up and say, hey, this isn't an okay system. I'm not okay with this. And they tell somebody, and they actually go up the chain. And yes, there are whistleblower laws in the state of California and other places that are supposed to protect whistleblowers. There are ways that whistleblowers can be protected. However, that doesn't necessarily empower the whistleblower. The whistleblower usually is still committing career suicide in whistleblowing. Now, outcasts might be whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are usually outcast, but not all outcasts are whistleblowers. Some outcasts were outcasts not wanting to be outcasts, but just found themselves, unfortunately, in that situation where they were thrown out of the organization. Now, conducive environments, there's a lot of them. So there's actually 2 slides for conducive environments. One part of in conducive environments is cultural values. In a Christian system, the ideas of having a lofty vision, like to reach the ends of the world for Jesus Christ, the least reached people groups, to bring the transformation and the gospel of Jesus, the shalom of God's wholeness to all peoples. That's a really big vision. That's a very lofty vision. There's also a deep motivation. People that join an organization like this aren't doing it for the money. They're not doing it even because it's going to be easy, but because they have a deep motivation. There's also sometimes a spiritualized submission. A lot of Christian theologies really emphasize that it's spiritually appropriate to submit to your leaders and to even blindly submit. So the loyalty and blind obedience goes another step further, where you just need to be loyal and you need to just give them the blank check yes. And that was definitely a part of this organization. There's the call to unity, which is actually uniformity. It's a call to unity under the unifying principle of whatever the dictator, the leader is saying. There's a protectiveness of appearances. And what I call a code of silence. This is something that James Stevens wrote about. That this is a code of silence is something where people choose to not say what happened to them. They are abused in a system and they walk away and they keep their mouth shut for whatever reason. There's also a fear of conflict within this organization. In the context, there's a value of a fear of conflict. There is a devaluation of individuals, and of course, as oftentimes you find in dysfunctional systems, there's cronyism and nepotism. Another part of conducive environments are communication issues. In this particular organization, we saw many things such as intentional spin, where information is recrafted to say something that might even be almost opposite of what actually is happening. And then gossip was used very, very strategically. Even though gossip is supposed to be something that Christians aren't supposed to do, gossip was used, especially by the founders and within the inner circle, to kind of keep control over people, because they would make comments about people that were doing things that they didn't like, things that they wanted to see corrected, not necessarily to those people's faces, but to kind of malign them to other people. There was also a confusion that would happen where what is said is kind of confusing and kind of vague, and there's sometimes withholding of information or providing only part of the story or only to some people and not others. And then there's just the regular just don't talk. You don't talk about the problem. You don't talk about the problem. We don't talk about problems. That whole don't talk syndrome is very real, and it was talked about in many of the different studies that I brought into my research. And also being conflict avoidant. Also in the conducive environments, there's the lack of accountability, there's lack of transparency, and then finally there's things like organizational amnesia, where people kind of forget what they did before and why they did it and what the vision and mission really meant and why they came there in the first place. And even organizational schizophrenia, where people actually act in a counter way that's totally different than what they should have acted. Like, for example, the idea that a U.S. Center for World Mission, which gathered people together to collaborate to bring the world to Jesus Christ, and everyone gathered to this campus in Pasadena, that they spent 12 years raising the money to pay off this campus, which used to be the Point Loma campus. It was the Pasadena College campus, that they paid all this money, that all of these people over 40 some years have dedicated their lives to this. And then poof, a few leaders decide, oh, we're going to just sell it because we can all do it all online now, so we don't really need a campus anymore. And so really it's a matter of where this is actually a break. This is like a schizophrenia, where it's like, who are you? This is a complete betrayal of the donor covenants, of the community, of all the promises and all of their published materials all these years. It's organizational schizophrenia. So anyway, back to my story. Part 1, the best of intentions. These 3 families all longed for significance and community. They were willing to sacrifice and work hard. They had kind and altruistic intentions. They valued the vision and mission. They all loved Jesus, and they all wanted to see people come to know the good news of Jesus Christ. They realized that there were unreached people groups, people in the world that have never even fully heard the name of Jesus Christ, usually in very difficult contexts where it's hard for the gospel to penetrate for whatever reason, but they were passionate about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with all peoples. Now, part 2 is trouble in paradise. Once they found themselves in the organizations, they found themselves confronting different systems that weren't really very congruent with a healthy, functional organization. One of the kind of quirky things about the U.S. Center for World Mission was this wartime lifestyle that kind of came out of Ralph and Roberta Winter's own feelings when they were ministering among very poor people in Guatemala, that Americans are far too consumeristic, that they're rich and they have so much, and they don't sacrifice, they don't use what they have for the cause of world mission. We need to behave as if we were in like the Second World War, where everyone was rationed and everything was focused, and we're on a mission, we're on a vision. And so this wartime lifestyle just absolutely drenched the canvas of this organization. It limited how much money people were allowed to raise. It called certain things frivolous and other things important. It made all sorts of constraints on the community. In the early days, people they almost competed to see who could drive the junkiest car, who could live in the most weird, awful garage apartment, or who could be abased the most, so that they could show that they were spending all of their money on the cause for world mission. And next, there was communication dysfunctions. As you can see in the conducive systems, there's all sorts of different issues that can happen with communication. And they began to see these communication dysfunctions, and they began to exhibit and experience the control systems that were happening in this organization. And control was seen in so many different ways. I know the founder, he was incredibly manipulative at times. He was incredibly controlling. He would, one quote that I have is, Ralph Winter was a brilliant guy, a genius. He always knew he was right. He knew better. Ralph went to great lengths to be in control. He wanted to be the abbot, the unquestioned head of our whole community. He wanted to be the one with the final say, the one who made all of the important decisions, the one who had the final word on every detail. And that, of course, when you're asking people to collaborate with you, that doesn't always work real well. And lastly, they found that there was no real accountability or transparency, and that if they accidentally butted heads with Ralph Winter or the leaders, then there was all sorts of hell to pay. And that is part 3, the road to hell. Now, all 3 of these amazing families that worked very hard from their whole heart for this organization ended up experiencing abuses that no one should have to suffer. The first family worked really hard to actually help the campus to not fall into foreclosure. But unfortunately, in doing so, Ralph Winter had this idea that everyone would pay $15.95 for a copy of his wife's book, and they'd get 1 million people to do that, and that's how they would pay off the campus. But it wasn't working. It wasn't working fast enough. And so this individual and his family, they came up with a plan called the Last 1,000 campaign, which actually ended up paying off the campus, raising $8.5 million in the 80s. It was amazing. It worked. It was fabulous. It paid off the campus, and it upset the founder. And so the founder found ways to ask other people in the community, this is part of the susceptible colluder, people in the community actually speak against this family and testify that they weren't spiritual, and they were literally excommunicated from the community after saving the campus and making it possible for all of the ministry work that's been going on till that day. It's a really super painful story, completely inappropriate, but it happened. And amnesia, all these other people just let it happen, and no one wanted to confront the founder about it. And so it was like all of a sudden they just go on, and no one's even noticing that a key person who had literally saved the campus is no longer among them. The second family was there at the peak capacity time when literally the campus was bursting at the seams, and they ran a community house in one of the largest houses on campus. And all of the campus housing, wartime lifestyle, remember, things weren't being repaired very nicely. They weren't being repaired well. And there was a heater that ended up going out. The gas company said, look, I'm not going to relight this because there's a crack in it. I can't, this is unsafe. And also there was a beehive that had come in, and there was bees and honeys and rats and roaches. And so they were asking the center, for the property services department to fix the house the way that they'd actually gotten a list of these things are wrong and this is what we're going to do. But then of course they sacked the property manager that made those promises, and then they didn't want to keep the promises. And the family in the second era, in the capacity era, kind of pushed and said, hey, would you please fix these things? We really need these fixed. And they were told, oh, you think you're too good for our property. And they ended up having their missions accounts. Now, these are people that all raise support. So this is money that they ask their friends and neighbors to donate to their account that's in an account there in the structure of the organization. These assets that these people had raised were frozen. They were literally evicted from their house. They actually raised money outside of their account to pay the rent, and they still work to evict them. These are all month-to-month rental situations. So it becomes very easy when people breach the code to get them out of there. So that's what happened to this poor family. Is they had their accounts frozen, they were evicted from their house, and then the organization actually had the gall to tell other people that this family had sued them instead of the truth, which was that the organization had sued this family. And of course, a lot of Christians really feel nervous and don't like the idea of suing each other. So this family actually knew that they were abused, but didn't pursue a lawsuit because they felt like that would be an inappropriate thing to do spiritually. And this organization totally took advantage of the fact that they knew that people were like that in this way. And then they took it even a step further, and they actually went to the donors, because they had the donor list. And so they went to all of the donors of these people and wrote a nasty letter basically saying that they were not integrous, that they had run behind in their rent, that they were in trouble with the organization, and that they weren't doing good ministry, and destroyed their ministries. Their ministry never recovered from that. They were forced out. They ended up having to move away. They were blacklisted because they had the eviction on their record. It made it really, really difficult. This family had a lot of trauma as a result of that. The third family, the abuse that happened was the individual I interviewed, who actually happens to be my husband. I'm part of the third family. He was the HR and personnel director for the center, and he saw all of these different people being abused and being treated badly, and whistleblowers being witch hunted, and all sorts of horrible things happening, illegal things, inappropriate things happening in the organization. And he's like, hey, this isn't okay. And then it became a point of shooting the messenger. And so he was retaliated and eventually terminated from his position. And then we had been invited to live in one of their houses. And then, of course, they did the same thing, month-to-month rent. So they increased our rent significantly, and then all of a sudden started giving us these outrageous utility bills. So we were all of a sudden getting, for 1 month, a $603 water bill for a 3-bedroom little place. And we didn't even have a stack washer dryer because we didn't have one small enough to fit in there. We had one bathroom. It's like, really? A little tiny yard. And $603 for the water bill, and I think it was $453 for the electricity 1 month. It's like, wow. And it was what they call a constructive eviction, where they make it uncomfortable enough so that you eventually leave. And so that's what they did. And so we thankfully found another house around the corner that they don't own, and they can't mess with us at. So we're still in the neighborhood, and here we are. And so the aftermath of these retaliations, obviously this is really painful. When you give your life and your heart to a community, and you work really hard, and you're working from your heart, and you're working altruistically, you're donating your time, your energy, your effort, you're praying together, this becomes a very important community, and it's really painful when something like that is betrayed. Once again, perspectives, power, and promises. These three people had different ideas, different parts. They had different places where they were in the structure of the organization, in the times in history, and they saw different things. The people close in saw more of the gossip and abuse, whereas the people that were in the full capacity era got to experience the brunt of what that looks like when you were the outsider. They all experienced the different power struggles that happened and how things were manipulated, and they all had been drawn in by the promises of being a part of a collaborative world mission center where people would have a lifelong community. And unfortunately, promises were broken. And promises to our whole community have still been broken. Now we don't even have a center anymore. We're just relegated. There's one building left. And now the city of Pasadena is saying that because we sold the campus, we don't even have the zoning rights to use that one as an office anymore. So I don't know what they're going to do. They've already shut down the PhD program because they didn't want to get it accredited, because they wanted to be accredited with a distance only place so that they could justify selling the campus. And now who knows if they're even going to get accredited? Who knows what's going to happen? There's all sorts of sketchy things happening in this organization. So my conclusion is responsible organizational stewardship is more than just leading a visionary mission or managing programs or assets. Mindful leadership is really needed. It's creating a sense of being aware and caring. It's having an idea of benevolent advocacy where we care about everybody in the community and the welfare of all members, not just the strong ones, not just the powerful ones. And also, this requires a real courageous faith, because you have to believe that you have enough for everybody. And it does require courageous integrity, where it's not just you feel that there's a right thing to do, but you actually are bold enough, even when you're afraid sometimes, to push past the fear and do the right thing. Now, further studies are needed in this area. This is just, there's so much more. I really would love to further explore if it's possible, how to detoxify and rehabilitate the toxic system, and also how to effectively confront and rehabilitate destructive leaders. And also we need to create more appropriate accountability and transparency structures within organizational Christian systems. And also we need to develop an organizational culture that values each person in the system so that no one is sacrificed to the cult of the cause. We need wholeness, healing, and holistic transformation for those who've been injured in these systems, and we need to create a culture of courageous faith and integrity. Now, these are my reference pages, and I know they're long and there's a lot of them. And so I thought I'd make it fun by putting a little llama drama in this for you. So yes, one more to go. So I've got 4 pages of references here. It was a great project. There was a lot of great studies. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation. There's my contact information in the corner if you want to follow the saga on Save the Campus or what's happening. We have a Facebook page. We have YouTube playlists. We do have a GoFundMe account even, because we are working with Save the Campus and Historic World Mission Center to try to stop and reverse the sale of the campus and hold these leaders accountable for their illegal and inappropriate betrayals of all the donor covenants and their abuses of the community. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. God bless you.